Radio TV Reports, INC. This is for public affairs staff. Program is 60 minutes. TV station is WDVM TV, CBS network. Date is December 23rd, 1984, 7 p.m. Washington, D.C. Subject is MKULTRA mind control experiments. Ed Bradley says, MKUltra is not the name of a new James Bond movie. It is, or was, the code word for a secret CIA project which took place between 1953 and 1964, in which unsuspecting people were used in mind control experiments that left them emotionally crippled for life. MKUltra consisted of more than 130 research programs which took place in prisons, hospitals, and universities all over the United States. Tonight we'll look at the subproject number 68, an experiment conducted in Canada. The CIA does not deny that these experiments took place. In fact, we'll show you an internal agency memo which admits their involvement. The rationale for all of this? Well, the memo doesn't say, but it is apparent that learning how to make people do things they normally wouldn't do by controlling their mind is valuable if you're in the espionage business. Dr. Edwin Cameron, an American, now dead, headed the Allen Memorial Institute at the McGill University in Montreal, Canada, where the experiments took place. Dr. Cameron never told his patients they were being used as guinea pigs. Zal Orlico says, I can't get over the rage that I feel that he would have done this to me and to other people. Unintelligible. Bradley says, in 1957, Zal Orlico was suffering from depression. It was recommended that she see Dr. Cameron, who was one of the leading psychiatrists in Canada. Her treatment from Dr. Cameron? Massive doses of lysergic acid diethylamide, a new experimental mind-altering drug called LSD. It destroyed her mental health. Orlico says, they took away the remaining years of my life. This is page 2. They really wrung them out and left me with a piece of rag to live. And that's not good enough. That's just not good enough. And it's not good enough for me. And it's not good enough for anybody else. And as long as I can open my mouth, as long as I can fight, I am going to fight. Bradley says, Miss Orlico decided to fight when she read a newspaper report about the CIA funding of the mind control experiments and suspected that she was one of the victims. Her husband, David Orlico, a member of Canada's Parliament, was able to help her find 8 other people who had been used as guinea pigs by Dr. Cameron when he was receiving funds through a front organization from the CIA. After obtaining their medical records, which confirmed their involvement, they joined in a suit against the U.S. government, each asking for $1 million. Each of the plaintiffs came here to the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal expecting therapy. Instead, what they got was a nightmare of experiments. They were electroshock treatments many times greater than the norm. They were subjected to sleep therapy, long periods, often up to 60 days, during which they were drugged so much that the better part of each day was spent sleeping. During these periods, they were subject to what's called psychic driving, the constant repetition of tape-recorded messages, often up to 500,000 times. They were also injected with drugs, Curare, which brought on the temporary paralysis, and LSD, which led to terrifying hallucinations. Orlico says, He injected the lysergic acid into the vein, then he patted me on the shoulder and said, "Now there, lassie, we'll see you later." And he went out and closed the door. Well, it was only a few minutes before I began to feel very peculiar, and things began to become very distorted. And I didn't seem to have any control over anything. I started to feel very frightened, and the fright became a terror, and I sort of began throwing myself from one side of the room to the other. I didn't know what to do to stop this feeling. It felt like my bones were melting away. I just didn't know who I was anymore. Bradley says, Robert Logie was 18 years old when he came to the Allen Memorial Institute with severe leg pains that had, moving on to page 3, that had been diagnosed as psychosomatic or by emotional problems. He got the full battery of treatment: sleep therapy, electroshock, many times the norm, psychic driving, and LSD. All of that has left permanent mental scars, and what haunts Logie the most is the psychic driving, those messages drilled into his brain when he was virtually paralyzed with drugs. Robert Logie says, "I have a lot of questions about it now, and why can't I know what was on the tapes? And it just haunts me and haunts me. You know, what were they trying to make me believe or whatever?" Bradley says, Dr. Mary Moreau was a physician who came to Dr. Cameron to ask for a fellowship in psychiatry. She had looked tired and nervous, and he would not consider her for a fellowship until she underwent sleep therapy. She thought that meant a period of rest with sedatives administered periodically, so she consented. What she got was electroshock depatterning. Dr. Mary Moreau says he used 67 times the average dose of electric current by pushing the buttons of the electroshock machine 6 times in succession rather than one. And besides that, instead of getting it 2 or 3 times a week, one press of a button, like most physicians do, he gave it in daily successions. Bradley says, the result? Dr. Morrow lost her identity. Dr. Morrow says, I was suspended in space, in a deep black hole. I had no idea that I was a human being. I was without knowledge of my appendages. I had no sense of solidity. I was floating. I was completely disoriented. I thought I was an organism. Bradley says, Dr. Morrow's mother saw what was happening to her daughter and demanded that she be released from the Allen Institute. When she regained what she calls her human identity, Dr. Morrow realized that her treatment had nothing to do with healing. In fact, she had suffered permanent brain damage. Dr. Morrow says, unintelligible, absolutely gone, confusion of voices, in brackets. Dr. Morrow says, in a nutshell, my life today is in a unintelligible shadow. I am left with a permanent difficulty, which is called unintelligible. That is unintelligible. I could talk to you and, somewhere unintelligible. If I meet you tomorrow in a changed environment, I don't know you. I don't know you're Mr. Bradley. If I could meet you in unintelligible, in a, moving on to page 4, local supermarket, or on the water, I won't know you from Adam. Bradley says, Dr. Elliot Emanuel was a junior associate under Dr. Cameron. Although he was not part of the brainwashing experiments, he defends Dr. Cameron and raises questions about his patients. Dr. Elliot Emanuel says, there you have to bear in mind that these were mentally ill patients. I insist on that. They weren't there because they, for any other reason, to my knowledge. They were mentally ill patients, and their perception or their recall 30 years later of the events may not be perfect. Bradley says, memories may not be perfect after 30 years, but there is no doubt about the experiments conducted by Dr. Cameron and funded by the CIA. This internal agency memo from the CIA's General Counsel refers to substantial funds flowing from this agency to McGill in support of the project, and it goes on to say that the use of drugs, and particularly extensive electroshock, suggests that long-term after effects may have been involved. Are you not at all disturbed about what he did in using human beings? Dr. Emanuel says, in the context of the time, medical treatments, innovative medical treatments, inevitably have the aspect of being experiments. There is nothing so terrible about that. Bradley says, but there's a question of misuse, and there are people who are claiming that they were misused. Dr. Emanuel says, I think it's going to be very hard for those patients to prove that their present condition was due to experimentation beyond what would be acceptable treatment at the time. Bradley says, Dr. Harvey Weinstein, a psychiatrist and professor at Stanford University, spent years researching on what happened to Cameron's patients at the hospital during the time of the CIA-funded experiments. Why? His father had entered Dr. Cameron's care with a mild neurotic condition and came out several years later with physical brain damage and a complete change of personality. Dr. Harvey Weinstein says, what Dr. Cameron seemed to do was to take these and to use them not only on people who were severely ill, he did do that, but to use it on people who were mildly ill, people with neurotic conditions, people for whom these kinds of treatments simply were not indicated at all. Page 5. And when someone says to me that that was being done, there was the standard of the time, I balk, because it was not the standard of the time. No one anywhere was putting them together in this kind of package. Bradley says, but they were sick, many of these people. Dr. Weinstein says, the fact that some people were neurotic, that is, did not have conditions that were a major disturbance, does not mean that they weren't people who were rational and capable of thinking and remembering until this work was done. Bradley says, from 1957 to 1960, Richard Helms and his associate, Sidney Gottlieb, were responsible for the CIA's MKULTRA. In 1973, before he left as head of the agency, Helms and Gottlieb, in clear violation of government regulations, set out to destroy all records of MKUltra. But they overlooked a few financial documents which showed that the CIA, through a front organization, had spent at least $60,000 on the brainwashing experiments. And because of the destroyed records, no one can say how much more was spent. Both men declined our request for an interview. A Senate committee investigation into the CIA brainwashing experiments led to the recommendation that the CIA find and compensate the victims, a recommendation that was accepted by then CIA Director Stansfield Turner. But to this date, none of the victims in this case have received compensation or even an explanation of what happened. Joseph Raw is the lawyer for the Canadian plaintiffs. Joseph Raw says, you know, it's a wonderful thing that the CIA says. They say, quote, well, we only put up part of the money, end quote. But can you imagine saying, quote, I only gave half the money for shooting somebody, end quote. Well, you know how long it is. You know how long it would take to make that defense ridiculous. That is exactly the defense the CIA has. Bradley says, Ross says his evidence trying the CIA to brainwashing experiments will help his clients only in a court of law. And he says the agency has effectively stalled their day in court. Ross says they'd never put up anything or give you any material voluntarily. You've got to go to the judge, and they've always got rights to appeal. They're masters at stonewalling. Bradley says Canadian court officials have stated publicly that, page 6, the United States government has expressed its regret over the CIA's actions in this matter. However, none of those Canadian officials would talk with us on a camera about this case. And what's more, they have turned down all requests, even from members of Parliament, to make public the records of that apology, records that would help the 9 Canadian plaintiffs in their suit against the CIA. These officials say that international practice and customs precludes the disclosure of information that was given in confidence. The plaintiffs in this suit against the CIA were permanently damaged by the brainwashing experiments. Most of them were even unable to talk with us. You have met the most fortunate among the 9. After decades of trying, Dr. Moreau, at the age of 60, was finally able to gain her psychiatric credentials. She works at a small hospital in Ontario. Bradley says, "How has what happened to you under Dr. Cameron affected your life?" Dr. Morrow responds, "It killed it." Bradley responds, "Why?" Dr. Morrow says, "Absolutely." Unintelligible. "I'm 61, and I've been 24 years on this case. My life is misery." Unintelligible. Bradley says, when Robert Logie finally had an opportunity to examine his medical records, he learned that after the electroshocks, LSD, and psychic driving, doctors decided his leg pain was not psychosomatic at all. A few shots of cortisone ended the pain in his leg. Logie says, physically, there's few places you can go and have counseling and support groups and whatnot. But when you're mentally raped, there's nothing. And I don't trust any psychiatrist who might be able to help me. I couldn't trust one enough to get the help that I need in dealing with this. Bradley says, Miss Orlico suffers from flashbacks from depression, fear of crowds, and fear of heights. Finally knowing what really ruined her health is her only consolation. Until you found out about the experiments, until you found out that you were brainwashed, what did you think of all that happened? Orlico says, I thought I had failed. Page 7. And I am guilty of being like this because I failed at something I shouldn't have failed at. And David and Leslie have to put up with me, and I'm guilty. Well, when I read about it in the paper, the one thing that lessened considerably was the guilt. I didn't feel so guilty anymore. I felt it wasn't all my fault. Thank God. It's not all my fault, because, it's a terrible thing for people to have to put up with someone who has sometimes a quarter of a life, sometimes a half-life. Maybe once in a while you get almost to the peak of a full life, but you don't stay there very long. And that's the end of the document. This was approved for release on January 8th, 2010. That might be the file name, I'm not sure. And that's it for this video.